April 14th, 1945. 6:32 hours. The outskirts of Kassel, Germany. The morning fog hangs low over a churned-up beet field, clinging to the wreckage of barns and shattered apple trees, muffling the distant cough of engines from unseen panzers somewhere beyond the tree line. The war is supposed to be almost over. But for the men of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 318th Infantry Regiment, 80th Infantry Division, nothing about this gray morning feels like an ending. Private First Class Danny Mercer, drops into the shallow firing slit of his foxhole, breath steaming in the cold, fingers numb inside damp wool gloves that no longer keep anything out. His M1 Garand lies across his knees, bolt locked halfway back, a spent casing wedged at an ugly angle in the open action. A jam, now, of all times. He yanks the operating rod back again with a sharp metallic snap, but the brass casing doesn't budge. It is bent, scarred near the rim, jammed so deep it looks welded there. The rifle that saw him through the Hurtgen forest and across the Saar has chosen this morning to quit on him. You can almost feel the sour panic building in his stomach as he looks up over the lip of the foxhole toward the distant hedgerow. Sergeant Frank Dempsey, helmet pushed back on his forehead, crouches beside the foxhole with a cigarette burned down to the filter between his fingers. His eyes, red from too little sleep and too much artillery, flick from the hedgerow to Mercer's rifle. Somewhere beyond those thin trees, the low, animal growl of engines rises and falls, like predators pacing just out of sight. Panzer Battalion, they say, Dempsey mutters, smoke curling from his mouth. Somebody in G2 thinks they re-pulling armor from what? S left of the 11th Panzer Division to make a stand on the Fulva line. He says it like an accusation, as if the German tanks personally offended him by still existing this late in the war. Mercer doesn't answer. His world has narrowed to the cold steel in his hands. A man can get used to the idea of panzers. You hear them for miles. You feel them in the soles of your boots before you see them. But a man cannot get used to the idea of facing them with a rifle that doesn't work. He digs gloved fingers into the action, feels the gritty smear of powder residue along the bolt face and receiver walls, the residue that every GI is taught to fear almost as much as the enemy. The battalion had been moving hard for days, pushing through village after village that smelled of wet stone, manure, and cordite, overrunning rear area depots and repair yards as the collapsing Wehrmacht tried to get anything with tracks or wheels pointed east. Last night they dug in on this rise outside Kassel, told that armor was massing, that they were now the cork in a bottle the Germans were desperate to uncork. Mercer, you gonna marry that thing or fix it? Dempsey growls, voice low. He flicks the spent cigarette into the mud, grinds it under his boot. Mercer forces a breath in, then another. The jam is bad, but not impossible. They drilled this at Camp Forest and later in England. Clear the malfunction, keep the weapon clean, treat the Garand like a jealous friend. He digs into his musette bag, pulls out the stained OD cloth roll that holds his cleaning kit, sectional steel rod, bore brush, oil bottle, patches gone stiff from old carbon and dried solvent. A sound reaches them both at once. A deeper rumble beneath the idle growl of distant engines. Tracks, heavy ones. The kind that belong to Panzer IVs and Panthers. The iron backbone of German panzer divisions that American G is have learned to recognize just from the timbre of their approach. Dempsey's expression hardens. They're forming up. Mercer looks over the lip of the foxhole. The fog is lifting in slow, ragged curtains along the tree line half a kilometer away. Shapes move in that pale gray world, low, squarish silhouettes. An occasional glint where the weak sun catches steel. Turrets, maybe, the suggestion of a long barrel. Panzers warming up, forming line, preparing to push toward this ridge where Easy Company lies stretched out in shallow holes and scraped trenches, their thin line of bazookas and a single attached 57mm anti-tank gun, looking very small against the idea of German armor. "You got about 10 minutes before those bastards get brave," Dempsey says. "Clear it." Mercer drops back down, heart pounding. He locks the bolt back, tilts the rifle so the chamber faces him, the stuck casing gleaming dully under the overcast light. He can see where the rim tore when the extractor tried to pull it free. A bad round from a mismatched ammunition lot, picked up yesterday from a captured German depot. The quartermaster had said it was safe enough, but safe enough is cold comfort when you re-staring down a jam while tanks warm up in the distance. He takes the cleaning rod, screws 2 sections together, then a third, fingers moving faster than he realizes. The steel rod is cold enough to bite through the gloves. He runs his thumb along the bore brush, feeling the stiff brass bristles, then decides against it. He needs the rod smooth, no extra drag. The smell of oil and powder residue rises as he cracks open the oiler bottle and lets a thin line of dark fluid trace along the receiver rails and operating rod. It mixes with the older, burned-in scent of propellant baked into the metal from hundreds of rounds fired from the Argand to here. You can almost smell it, too, that bitter, metallic odor that never quite leaves. He feeds the rod down the muzzle, feeling for the mouth of the chamber. The tip touches brass. He braces the butt of the rifle against his thigh, hands steady, eyes locked on the jammed casing he can barely see from this angle. Dempsey watches, saying nothing, because there is nothing to say now. Somewhere to their right, along the company line, a lieutenant shouts into a field phone. Farther back, a half-track transmission grinds. A clank as the 57mm gun crew swings their weapon, trying to find the best killing ground. The wind shifts, and the diesel and exhaust reek of German armor drifts closer, thick and oily. Mercer tightens his grip and drives the rod down. Hard, the rifle jerks. The rod flexes alarmingly, but the casing doesn't move. Sweat breaks out along his neck despite the chill. He tries again, teeth clenched. This time the rod jumps, and a sharp metallic pop answers him. A bent casing drops free into the receiver with a clink, then tumbles into the mud at his feet. He exhales, shoulders sagging in relief. But the moment his fingers move to pull the rod back out, something catches his eye. The end of the rod doesn't look right. He frowns, leans closer. The rod tip is thinner than it should be, and there's a ragged step where smooth steel should run even. He pulls the rod completely free, lays it across his knee, and rotates it in the pale light. A small hairline crack runs along the last 3 inches of the rod section, a pale gleam against the darker metal, tight as a drawn thread. It stretches almost to full circumference, like a circle that was never finished. Dempsey notices his hesitation. Problem? Mercer doesn't answer immediately. He runs his thumb along the crack, feels the slight ridge where the metal is just barely displaced. He realizes the truth in a sudden, sick flash. That thing was one good hit away from snapping off in the barrel. One more slammed-down stroke, and 3 inches of steel would have broken off and lodged deep inside the bore. If that had happened in the middle of a firefight, if he rammed the rod down to clear a jam while Germans were charging, then tried to fire, the result would have been catastrophic. A bore obstruction, high-pressure gas with nowhere to go. The muzzle might have split open, like a peeled banana, shrapnel roaring backward into his face. There are whispered stories from other regiments about men half-blinded or killed that way, their own rifles turning into fragmentation grenades. He feels suddenly cold. Dempsey. He holds the rod up. The sergeant squints, then curses softly under his breath. That's a factory crack. Or somebody dropped that thing from a truck 3 months ago and never told anybody. Around them, the sounds of preparation sharpen. Shouted ranges, the clack of ammo boxes, the thin, nervous laughter of men trying very hard not to think about steel monsters beyond the trees. The grinding of tank transmissions grows louder, more insistent. Mercer looks from the cracked rod to his rifle, then back again. The realization hits harder than the chill in his bones. If one rod in his kit is cracked, what about the others in the platoon? How many cleaning rods came from that same batch? With the same invisible flaw waiting to fail the second, some kid slams it down under fire. And then, from beyond the hedgerow, a new sound cuts through everything else. The hoarse, rising scream of a German tank engine pushed hard, followed by the sharper, more urgent revving of 2, 3, maybe 4 more. The panzers are moving. Mercer's thumb still rests on the hairline crack as they start to roll. The panzers emerge. There's no room for mistakes when your life depends on a few pounds of shaped explosive and a narrow shot at a tank's vulnerable spot. Mercer barely notices the sudden flurry of orders rippling down the trench line. His focus is still on the cracked cleaning rod across his knees. The realization has solidified into something cold and heavy inside him. This eye isn't to just about his rifle anymore. It's about everyone's. About what happens when a hidden flaw lives inside the tools men trust with their lives. Mercer. Dempsey's voice snaps like a whip. You back in the fight, or what? Mercer blinks, forces himself to move. He slides the cleaning rod back into its cloth roll, but not into its usual pocket. Instead, he wraps it separately in a scrap of oil-stained rag, marking it in his own quiet way as something dangerous. Then he snatches up the jammed casing, shoves it into his pocket, and pulls the bolt of his Garand back, letting it slam forward on an empty chamber. The action feels smoother now with the fresh oil, but his eyes flick once more to the rod. Sergeant, he says, keeping his voice low, something's wrong with the rods. Look at this. Dempsey hesitates, torn between the tank's crawling closer and the urgency in Mercer's tone. He ducks down, takes the rod in a scarred hand, turns it in the gray light. The crack is impossible to miss now that you know where to look. A nearly complete ring around the metal, a ghost of a break that hasn't quite happened yet. Jesus, he mutters. You use this in a hurry. It snaps. You plug the bore, and when you pull the trigger, he doesn't finish. He doesn't have to. You can almost feel the weight of that unfinished sentence. The Panzer IV in the lead grinds to a halt 200 yards beyond the tree line, hull rocking slightly as it settles. Its turret begins to traverse, slow and deliberate, searching for positions, for glints of light on optics, for any sign of American guns. Tracer from a nervous machine gunner arcs out from somewhere along the line. Bright green sparks skipping across the wet ground, pattering harmlessly against the tank's frontal armor. The Panzer ignores it, the way a man might ignore rain. Sir, Mercer calls, pushing up out of the foxhole just far enough to catch the eye of Lieutenant Harris, who is moving down the line with a field phone handset clamped to his ear. Lieutenant! Harris looks irritated when he reaches them, as if every second not spent talking to battalion is a second stolen. This better be important, Mercer. It is, Dempsey cuts in, handing over the rod. "Take a look at that." Found it while he was clearing a jam. Rod's cracked damn near clean through. Harris glances once toward the Panzers. Another tank has emerged now. Heavier, turret different, maybe a late-model Panzer IV with extra armor. Or even a Panther prowling farther back, then forces himself to focus on the steel in his hand. He rotates it, jaw tightening. "You sure it's not just this one?" "Not sure of anything," Dempsey says, and that's the problem. These kits came in together from that depot we rolled yesterday. If they're from the same batch, and this one's bad, odds are others are too. Harris swears under his breath. The idea unspools in his head the same way it did in Mercer's. A firefight. Some poor bastard slamming a rod down to clear a stovepipe or a swollen casing. The rod snapping, the bore plugging, the rifle turning into a bomb in his hands. Losses not from Panzer shells, but from their own gear. Behind the line, a deeper thunder begins to roll. American artillery somewhere far to the rear, testing the range, feeling for the right arc. The sky gives a distant, dull flash. Harris glances over his shoulder, then back to the rod. "This is Supply's problem," he says finally. "But until they fix it, it's ours." He presses the rod back into Mercer's hand. "You did right flagging it. For now, nobody uses cleaning rods unless they absolutely have to, and if they do, they check them first. Pass it down the line. I'll get word back to the company CO and Supply." Mercer nods, but something still gnaws at him. "Sir, with respect, that's not enough." Harris just looks at him, the faintest flicker of impatience in his eyes. Mercer swallows, pushes on. "Think about when these actually get used. Not now, when things are quiet. They get used when a gun jams in the middle of a firefight, when a man doesn't have time to check for hairline cracks, when he's scared and slamming that rod down as hard as he can." For a moment, all three of them just listen. To the tank engines, to the whispers of the men, to the soft, distant rumble of waiting artillery. "Sir, if these rods are bad, they'll kill men when they can least afford it." Mercer's voice stays steady, but there's a hard edge now, a stubbornness that wasn't there yesterday. "If we know that and don't do something, those deaths are on us." The words hang in the cold air. Harris studies him, this mud-covered private with a too serious look in his eyes. Then, almost reluctantly, the lieutenant nods once. "All right. Dempsey, get every cleaning kit in the platoon checked now. Any rod that looks even a little off gets pulled. Nobody uses a rod unless a sergeant has eyes on it first. Spread that to 1st and 3rd platoons if you can. I'll call it in to company. See if battalion can send word up to the regiment and ordnance." Dempsey grunts assent. The order will cost them precious minutes, but there are some gambles even infantrymen won't take when the stakes are this high. Mercer is already moving, scrambling along the inside of the trench, passing word in low, urgent tones. "Check your rods. Look for cracks near the tip, all the way around. If it's bad, pull it. Don't use them unless a sergeant says so." The men respond with wary confusion at first, and with a kind of dark, practical interest. They know what a blown barrel can do. Most have seen at least one weapon mangled by overpressure or obstruction, even if only in training. At Private Russo's hole, they find a rod with a similar crack, not as far along, but definitely there when inspected closely. At Corporal Jenkins' position, another. 3 rods in one platoon with nearly identical flaws. It's enough to strip the last doubt away. Far beyond their small drama of steel and hairline fractures, the panzer commander in the lead tank raises his head from the turret hatch and scans the American ridge through binoculars. He doesn't know about cleaning rods or the quiet danger they posed. His world is grids and map lines, ammunition counts and fuel, the desperate calculus of late-war German armor. He sees the faint disturbances in the earth, along the ridge, the flashes of movement, and he misreads them. He thinks the Americans are reinforcing the line, shifting bazooka teams forward for a close-range ambush. Vorsicht, he mutters into his throat mic. Infantry M Panzer Abwehr. Halten Sie abstand. We're sehen die Artillery. Caution. Infantry with anti-tank weapons. Keep your distance. We bring in artillery. What looks like a frantic response to impending armor is in reality a quiet purge of flawed steel rods and a message crawling up the chain of command toward men who spend their days thinking about logistics instead of life and death in a beet field. But the Panzer commander doesn't know that. His misinterpretation is about to matter more than anyone here can yet imagine. A whistle shrills somewhere behind the German line. The tanks begin to pivot, not into a full-bore charge, but into a cautious, slightly oblique advance, staying just beyond what their commander thinks is effective bazooka range. Their infantry dismount, fanning out, using the tanks as moving cover. On the American side, the 57mm gun barks suddenly, the report sharp, metallic, almost fragile against the deeper voices of the tanks. The shell slams into the leading panzer's frontal armor, leaving only a black smear and a ringing clang. The tank pauses, offended more than damaged. Its turret swings, the long barrel settling over the slight rise where the gun crew already scrambles to reload. Mercer drops into his foxhole as the panzer fires. The crack and scream of the high velocity ending in a violent explosion that lifts dirt and shattered wood into the sky somewhere down the line. City shell rip across the field. Men shout. A medic curses. The 57mm gun's position has vanished in a cloud of dust and smoke. Dempsey spits into the mud. That pea shooter just pissed it off. Yet even as the 57mm proves its limits against late-war German armor, the real shift has already begun, not in the steel of guns or the armor of tanks, but in the invisible arteries that feed an army, its supply lines, its quality control, its trust in the tools it gives its men. Somewhere back at battalion, a clerk will soon take Harris's frantic report and stamp it with urgency. Somewhere in an ordnance depot, an officer will pull sample rods from crates and run a fingernail along their tips, frowning. But all of that is still minutes or hours away. For now, Mercer presses himself deeper into the earth as the panzers adjust their line, trading speed for caution, trading aggression for range. Their decision to hold back may spare lives along Easy Company's thin, battered front. It may buy time for the artillery to lock in. It may even shape how this skirmish ends. And all of it because, while cleaning his rifle, one soldier saw a hairline crack in a length of steel that was never meant to matter. The first German shell that lands close enough to matter does not come from a tank at all. It comes from somewhere behind the tree line, from a gun crew hunched over a field piece whose exact type the men of Easy Company will never know. There is only the rising howl, the sharp, stomach-dropping instant of recognition. And then a blossom of earth and shrapnel erupts 30 yards short of the American line, showering foxholes with dirt and fragments. Down! Someone screams unnecessarily. The company is already pressed as far into the earth as they can go. The blast rolls over them, a hot, hard slap, then fades, leaving only the ringing in their ears and the patter of falling soil. You can almost feel the grit hitting their helmets, the way it creeps down the collars of their jackets. A second shell follows, closer, walking the line. The German artillerymen are probing, adjusting, feeling for the right bracket. Each impact gouges new craters into the already abused field. A scrap of cloth, someone's blanket, it's impossible to tell, cartwheels into the air and vanishes in the smoke. Mercer huddles low, rifle clutched tight, every muscle in his body coiled. Fear is a physical thing now, a tightness in his chest, a buzzing in his fingers. Yet part of his mind remains stubbornly fixed on that cracked rod, on the message Harris is even now trying to push up the chain. It is insane, he thinks, to be worrying about quality control while high explosive tries to erase him from the earth. And yet, war has always been a layered madness like this. Behind the line, a runner in a steel helmet too big for his head zigzags between shell bursts, field phone handset clutched to his chest. He skids into the shallow command post, dug into the reverse slope, where Captain Reynolds, Easy Company's CO, crouches over a grease-stained map. Harris is already there, sweat streaking tracks through the dust on his face. "Sir, battalion acknowledges," the runner pants. They're flagging it to ordnance. Message is going up to regiment and division. They want samples of the bad rods sent back as soon as possible. Reynolds exhales slowly. The captain is not thinking about cleaning rods as an abstract problem. He's thinking about what happens if this flaw shows up in the middle of the next day's fighting, or the next week's. He's thinking about how late in the war it is, how everyone expects things to be smoother now, safer even. As if mass production and experience were shields against mistakes. They are not. "Fine," Reynolds says. "Get word to all companies. Check rods immediately. Any suspect gear gets pulled. Ordnance will have our samples by nightfall, if we live that long." He looks up, eyes hard. In the meantime, we still have panzers on our doorstep. Above them, the sky flickers faintly. Far to the rear, American artillery has finally found its voice. The first salvo falls long, bursting harmlessly beyond the German line. The second walks in closer. The artillerymen, working from fire missions relayed through battalion, are adjusting too, like invisible swordsmen testing their reach. On the forward slope, Mercer risks a glance over the lip of his hole as another German round shrieks overhead. The panzers have halted again, silhouettes dark against the pale, smoke-streaked horizon. They fire intermittently now, probing for American guns, using their coaxial machine guns to rake likely positions. The infantry that had begun to fan out now hug the ground, pinned by the knowledge that the Americans have at least some artillery of their own. "Mercer." Dempsey's voice cuts through the chaos. "You pass the word?" "Every man in the platoon, Sarge." Mercer wipes mud from his face with the back of his glove. "Found 2 more rods with cracks, Russo and Jenkins. Pulled them." Dempsey nods once, satisfied. "Good. Maybe you just saved somebody's eyesight. Or worse." He glances toward the distant tree line. "Shame we can't scare those panzers with busted cleaning rods." The sarcasm is a shield, but beneath it lies a grudging respect. Men have been killed by less obvious things than defective steel. In a war where entire armored divisions clash, the tiny decisions, the checked rod, the reported flaw, rarely make the after-action reports. Yet they shape outcomes all the same. A new sound begins to thread through the chaos. A deeper, more rhythmic roar, distant but growing. Mercer mistakes it at first for more tanks, but Dempsey stiffens, listening with a veteran's ear. "That's our heavies," he says. "Corps' artillery, maybe. Somebody important must have decided Kassel is worth a lot of shells." He is right. On a series of muddy gun lines miles away, 155mm howitzers and other heavy pieces are elevating their barrels to new angles. Fuses set, charges loaded. Fire direction centers feed them corrected coordinates based on forward observer reports. Those observers, peering through scopes from precarious vantage points, have just tagged the German armor massing near the tree line. "Fire mission, tank concentration," a voice had said into a radio minutes ago. Grid. The numbers mean nothing to Mercer, but their echo arrives now in the form of screaming steel. The first American heavy shell falls short of the panzers, throwing up a towering column of earth and smoke that billows over the leading tanks. The German crews button up, hatches slamming, silhouettes contracting as men vanish inside their armored shells. A second shell lands directly among the infantry that had been using the tanks as cover. For a moment, the field is a chaotic blur of motion as men dive for any depression they can find. Then the real barrage starts. Shell after shell rips into the German line, walking back and forth along the edge of the trees where the tanks had paused. The earth heaves, trees shatter, great gouts of dirt, splinter, and twisted metal leap into the air. Even from the American position, you can feel the concussions. A drumbeat you don't just hear, but feel in your ribs. Mercer ducks as fragments whistle overhead like angry hornets. The sky is briefly full of them, tiny, deadly things you can't see until they pass. He curls around his rifle and waits. Inside their steel beasts, the panzer crews are living through a different kind of hell. Armor protects against many things, but not against the sheer psychological weight of being trapped in a metal box, while high explosive claws at it from every direction. One shell lands close enough to knock the lead tank sideways in its track depression. Its crew feels the world tilt, the lights flicker, dust cascading from the interior walls. Their commander's ears ring, his mouth filling with the taste of cordite and fear. The German artillery that had been shelling the American line tries to respond, but the heavier weight of Allied guns quickly smothers it. Fire missions intended to protect the panzers turn into frantic attempts at survival. Communications lines crackle with contradictory orders. Withdraw, hold, shift position. The clear, aggressive thrust that had seemed possible an hour ago now dissolves into chaos under the rain of steel. In the shallow CP behind the ridge, Captain Reynolds gets the word over the field phone. The handset pressed so tight against his ear it might leave a permanent mark. German armor pulling back from forward positions. Artillery effective. Tanks attempting to reposition east of the tree line. Confirm, Reynolds says, voice flat. When he hangs up, he lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. For now at least, the immediate crisis of a full-on panzer charge against his thinly held ridge has passed. Back at the foxholes, the change is slower to register. The noise doesn't stop, but its character shifts. Tank guns fall silent or fire from farther back, their distinctive cracks muffled by distance. The shriek of incoming shells lessens. The gaps between blasts lengthen. Men begin to look up, one by one, like animals emerging from burrows after a storm. Mercer lifts his head, blinking dust from his eyes. The tree line that had seemed so sharp an hour ago is now a ragged scar, trees shorn of branches, dark smoke curling upward. Through the haze, he glimpses a tank. Hard to tell which type now, everything distorted by heat shimmer, reversing clumsily, hull turned slightly away as if in reluctant retreat. Another sits at an awkward angle, one track off, immobilized. That did it, Dempsey says quietly. They're not coming at us straight on. Not today, anyway. The relief that washes through the trench line is not jubilation. It is something more fragile, the loosening of a cord that has been drawn too tight. Men test arms and legs, make sure everything still works. The medic moves along the line, checking on those who took fragments or shock when the shells hit close. The dead, mercifully, are fewer than they might have been if the panzers had tried a direct assault and broken through. Mercer sits back against the side of his foxhole, feeling the mud soak deeper into his trousers. His hands shake now that the immediate danger has eased, the delayed tremor of a body that has been too busy to be afraid, and now has time to catch up. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the bent, jammed casing he cleared earlier, turning it over between his fingers. This thing, he says softly, half to himself. All this over this stupid thing? Dempsey glances at the casing. All what? Me cleaning the rifle, finding the crack, getting Harris to care. Mercer looks out toward the battered tree line. If I'd just yanked that casing out some other way and never noticed the rod, we'd still be using them. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, some guy somewhere rams one down too hard in a firefight and blows his rifle apart. That could be the man with the bazooka that kills a tank, or the guy covering a flank. Maybe that one flaw means a panzer gets through somewhere it shouldn't. Dempsey studies him, then shrugs in a slow, almost respectful way. War's made of maybes, but you're not wrong. Little things add up. Logistics, maintenance. All that stuff the brass writes about when they're patting themselves on the back. Most of it never shows up on the maps, but it still decides who lives and who doesn't. He jabs a thumb toward the rear. You kicked a rock down a hill, Mercer. Now it's rolling. Ordnance hears about this. They'll start checking rods. Factory might tighten inspections. Next batch they send out won't have this problem. Maybe that means some poor kid in another regiment doesn't eat a faceful of steel next month. Mercer looks back down at the casing, then at his rifle. The weapon feels heavier now, not physically, but in what it represents. A chain of steel and work and human decisions stretching back across an ocean to machine shops and inspectors, foremen and line workers rushing to meet quotas. Somewhere along that chain, someone missed a fault in a length of steel that could have cost lives. Think they'll actually fix it? Mercer asks quietly. Dempsey snorts. They'll try. War or no war, no one in Ordnance wants to be known as the guy whose junk rods blew up Garands in G his faces. He claps Mercer on the shoulder. And they sure as hell won't forget the report that started it. Might not have your name on it by the time it reaches some desk in D.C., but the change? That's partly you. Out beyond the ridge, the German armor continues to edge back, harassed by artillery. The panzers are not destroyed. Many will fight again somewhere east, among other ridges and in other fields. But their thrust toward this particular American line has been blunted, diverted, forced into more cautious patterns that make them easier targets for Allied guns. And the real barrage starts. Shell after shell rips into the German line, walking back and forth along the edge of the trees where the tanks had paused. The earth heaves, trees shatter, great gouts of dirt, splinter, and twisted metal leap into the air. Even from the American position, you can feel the concussions, a drumbeat you don't just hear, but feel in your ribs. Mercer ducks as fragments whistle overhead like angry hornets. The sky is briefly full of them, tiny, deadly things you can't see until they pass. He curls around his rifle and waits. Inside their steel beasts, the panzer crews are living through a different kind of hell. Armor protects against many things, but not against the sheer psychological weight of being trapped in a metal box, while high explosive claws at it from every direction. One shell lands close enough to knock the lead tank sideways in its track depression. Its crew feels the world tilt, the lights flicker, dust cascading from the interior walls. Their commander's ears ring, his mouth filling with the taste of cordite and fear. The German artillery that had been shelling the American line tries to respond, but the heavier weight of Allied guns quickly smothers it. Fire missions intended to protect the panzers turn into frantic attempts at survival. Communications lines crackle with contradictory orders. Withdraw, hold, shift position. The clear, aggressive thrust that had seemed possible an hour ago now dissolves into chaos under the rain of steel. In the shallow CP behind the ridge, Captain Reynolds gets the word over the field phone. The handset pressed so tight against his ear, it might leave a permanent mark. German armor pulling back from forward positions. Artillery effective. Tanks attempting to reposition east of the tree line. Confirm, Reynolds says, voice flat. When he hangs up, he lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. For now, at least, the immediate crisis of a full-on panzer charge against his thinly held ridge has passed. Back at the foxholes, the change is slower to register. The noise doesn't stop, but its character shifts. Tank guns fall silent or fire from farther back, their distinctive cracks muffled by distance. The shriek of incoming shells lessens. The gaps between blasts lengthen. Men begin to look up, one by one, like animals emerging from burrows after a storm. Mercer lifts his head, blinking dust from his eyes. The tree line that had seemed so sharp an hour ago is now a ragged scar, trees shorn of branches, dark smoke curling upward. Through the haze, he glimpses a tank, hard to tell which type now, everything distorted by heat shimmer. Reversing clumsily, hull turned slightly away as if in reluctant retreat. Another sits at an awkward angle, one track off, immobilized. That did it, Dempsey says quietly. They're not coming at us straight on. Not today, anyway. The relief that washes through the trench line is not jubilation. It is something more fragile, the loosening of a cord that has been drawn too tight. Men test arms and legs, make sure everything still works. The medic moves along the line, checking on those who took fragments or shock when the shells hit close. The dead, mercifully, are fewer than they might have been if the panzers had tried a direct assault and broken through. Mercer sits back against the side of his foxhole, feeling the mud soak deeper into his trousers. His hands shake now that the immediate danger has eased, the delayed tremor of a body that has been too busy to be afraid, and now has time to catch up. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the bent, jammed casing he cleared earlier, turning it over between his fingers. This thing, he says softly, half to himself. All this, over this stupid thing. Dempsey glances at the casing. All what? Me cleaning the rifle, finding the crack, getting Harris to care. Mercer looks out toward the battered tree line. If I just yanked that casing out some other way and never noticed the rod, we'd still be using them. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Some guy somewhere rams one down too hard in a firefight and blows his rifle apart. That could be the man with the bazooka that kills a tank, or the guy covering a flank. Maybe that one flaw means a panzer gets through somewhere it shouldn't. Dempsey studies him, then shrugs in a slow, almost respectful way. War's made of maybes, but you're not wrong. Little things add up. Logistics, maintenance, all that stuff the brass writes about when they're patting themselves on the back. Most of it never shows up on the maps, but it still decides who lives and who doesn't. He jabs a thumb toward the rear. You kicked a rock down a hill, Mercer. Now it's rolling. Ordnance hears about this. They'll start checking rods. Factory might tighten inspections. Next batch they send out won't have this problem. Maybe that means some poor kid in another regiment docenty eat a faceful of steel next month. Mercer looks back down at the casing, then at his rifle. The weapon feels heavier now, not physically, but in what it represents. A chain of steel and work and human decisions stretching back across an ocean to machine shops and inspectors, foremen and line workers rushing to meet quotas. Somewhere along that chain, someone missed a fault in a length of steel that could have cost lives. Think they'll actually fix it? Mercer asks quietly. Dempsey snorts. They'll try. War or no war, no one in ordnance wants to be known as the guy whose junk rods blew up Garands in G is faces. He claps Mercer on the shoulder. And they sure as hell won't forget the report that started it. Might not have your name on it by the time it reaches some desk in D.C., but the change? That's partly you. Out beyond the ridge, the German armor continues to edge back, harassed by artillery. The panzers are not destroyed. Many will fight again somewhere east, among other ridges and in other fields. But their thrust toward this particular American line has been blunted, diverted, forced into more cautious patterns that make them easier targets for Allied guns. By dusk, the beet field lies quiet under a sky streaked with the bruised purple of fading light. The panzers have withdrawn fully now, their silhouettes swallowed by the gathering shadows east of Kassel, leaving behind only the smoldering husks of two immobilized tanks and the scattered forms of their infantry, too battered to press the attack. Easy Company licks its wounds. The 57mm gun is a twisted wreck, its crew mercifully unscathed but shaken, and a dozen men nurse shrapnel cuts or shell shock that will linger longer than the scars. Mercer sits on a ration crate near the company CP, his Garand stripped down across his lap, every component laid out on a poncho like surgical instruments. He has checked his remaining rods twice over, finding no more cracks, but the habit has spread through the platoon like a rumor. Men huddle in small groups, passing cleaning kits hand to hand, thumbs tracing steel under the weak beam of flashlights. One rod after another shows the telltale ring, faint in some, pronounced in others, all from the same suspect batch scavenged from that depot. Captain Reynolds emerges from the CP tent, mud caking his boots, a field message form clutched in one hand. His face is drawn, but there is a glint of something sharper in his eyes. Vindication, perhaps. He spots Mercer and beckons him over with a curt nod. "Private, you started something today." Inside the CP, lit by a single pressure lantern that throws harsh shadows across sandbag walls, a division ordnance sergeant named Harlan sits at a folding table, 3 cleaning rods arrayed before him like evidence in a trial. Harlan is a wiry man in his late 30s, spectacles perched on a sharp nose, the kind of technical specialist who has spent the war chasing flaws from one front to another. He has Mercer's original cracked rod under a magnifying glass, jotting notes on a clipboard with the methodical scratches of a man who knows his words might end up in a manual. "Caught it early," Harlan says without looking up, his voice carrying the flat twang of rural Pennsylvania. Hairline circumferential fatigue crack, right at the stress point where the rod flexes under torque. Material standard 4140 chrome moly steel. But the heat treats off, too brittle at the surface, probably from rushed quenching in some factory pushing triple shifts. He taps the rod. One good slam under pressure, and snap. 3 inches in the bore. Garand goes up like a pipe bomb. Reynolds folds his arms. How widespread? Harlan glances at the other rods. These samples? All from the same lot markings. Springfield Armory subcontract. Early 45 production. Divisions pulling every kit from the regiments now. Battalion ordnance is on it tonight. He pauses, eyes flicking to Mercer. "You find this mid-fight?" Mercer nods, throat suddenly dry. "Clearing a jam, sir." Rod nearly broke on the casing. Harlan exhales slowly, a sound heavy with the weight of near misses. Lucky, real lucky. If it had snapped in combat, you'd have chain reaction failures up and down the line. Jams lead to rods, rods lead to obstructions, obstructions lead to kaboom. Men blinded, rifles ruined, positions uncovered. He leans back, the lantern light catching the fatigue lines around his eyes. In a push like this, toward the Elbe, that could have meant panzers punching holes we couldn't plug. You can almost feel the ripple of that truth spreading outward, beyond this tent. Messages flash up the chain, from company to battalion, battalion to regiment, regiment to the 80th Division's Ordnance Section, and from there to Corps-level supply dumps stacked with crates of identical kits. By midnight, runners crisscross the division's lines, pulling suspect rods, substituting improvised fixes, bayonets filed down, wooden dowels wrapped in leather, anything to keep rifles functional until proper replacements arrive. But the real change brews deeper, in the war's hidden machinery. Harlan's report, stamped urgent and annotated with Mercer's name as the discoverer, travels by teletype to rear area depots and eventually across the channel to U.S. Ordnance Headquarters. Back in the field, the impact shows first in the small ways. Tomorrow's patrols move with rifles. They trust a little more. Platoon sergeants drill men on visual checks, a new ritual added to the endless cycle of maintenance. And when the next German counterattack probes, because there will be one, the Wehrmacht is collapsing but not yet dead. Easy Company's weapons hold true. No mysterious jams turning into catastrophes. No sudden blasts from within their own ranks, leaving flanks exposed. Word filters down from higher. The panzers that pulled back from Kassel today were the remnants of a kampfgruppe scraped together from the 11th Panzer serviceable hulks. Their commander spooked not just by artillery, but by what he saw as frantic American reinforcements along the ridge. In truth, those reinforcements were men checking cleaning rods, securing their deadliest enemy, unreliability. That hesitation bought the 80th Division time to consolidate, to bring up more guns, more Shermans, turning a potential breakthrough into just another bloody stutter in the final drive. Mercer steps out into the night, the CP lantern's glow fading behind him. The air smells of wet earth, diesel smoke, and the faint, acrid tang of exploded shells. Stars prick the overcast sky, indifferent witnesses. He thinks of the rod still wrapped in his rag, now in Harlan's possession, and wonders if it will end up in some after-action report, a footnote in a war diary. Probably not. Wars remember battles, not the steel that kept the rifles firing. But men do. Russo claps him on the back as he passes the platoon area. Heard about your lucky find, Mercer. Owe you a pack of smokes. Jenkins nods from his foxhole, rodless now, but rifle gleaming unnaturally clean. Even Dempsey, hunkered over a map by firelight, mutters, "Good eyes, kid. Saved asses." For the first time that day, Mercer feels something like pride cut through the exhaustion. Not the hot rush of combat victory, but a quieter certainty. One soldier, one rifle, one overlooked crack, rippled outward to steady a line, to caution a panzer thrust, to sharpen the edge of an army's tools as it closed the noose on Berlin. Yet dawn will bring new ridges, new rumors of armor massing. The war demands more than fixed rods. It demands men who look twice at what they are given. And in the distance, another low rumble stirs. Engines, perhaps, regrouping for tomorrow's gamble. Dawn breaks cold and merciless over the 80th Division sector, painting the horizon in smears of pink and steel gray, as patrols fan out from the ridge to probe the German withdrawal. Mercer moves with 2nd Platoon, boots sucking in the mud, Garand slung easy, but eyes scanning every shadow between shattered barns and hedgerows. Stripped bare by yesterday, sparage. The panzers are gone from sight, but their ghost lingers in the churned earth, deep gouges from tracks. Abandoned ammunition crates spilling 75mm shells like spilled teeth, the charred hull of a half-track tilted into a ditch. No one mentions the cleaning rods outright, but the change hums beneath the surface. Sergeants bark new orders during halts. Rifles down, kits out, check your rods, tip to handle. Men comply without grumbling, thumbs tracing steel with a focus that borders on ritual. In 1st Platoon, they pull 4 more suspect pieces. 3rd finds 3. By noon, a jeep from Division Ordnance rattles up the supply trail, its trailer piled with fresh kits, unmarked rods, gleaming under factory oil, stamped with revised lot numbers. Replacements, the driver announces, tossing crates like cordwood. Straight from the fix. No cracks. Heat treat bumped to spec. Your report kicked it all the way to cores. He jerks a thumb at Mercer, who stands nearby filling canteens. Heard it started here. Easy company. Good catch. Mercer nods, says nothing, but feels the weight shift. The new rod in his hands is heavier somehow, solid in a way the old one pretended to be. He threads it through his Garand's bore experimentally, the steel whispering smooth against rifling, no hidden treachery waiting to snap. Word spreads faster than the jeeps. By afternoon, the fix cascades through the division. 318th Infantry, then the 317th, the artillery battalions borrowing kits for their carbines and bars. Battalion S4 officers' radio back tallies, dozens of flawed rods quarantined. Samples boxed for shipment to stateside labs, where metallurgists will dissect the failure under microscopes. Even attached units, engineers bridging the Fulda, tank destroyers screening flanks, get the alert. Inspect, replace, report. The ripple hits the front in subtler ways. That evening, as Easy Company digs new holes along the Fulda Gap, a skirmish flares. German rearguard, Volkssturm boys with Panzerfausts, backed by a single Stu G3, grinding out from a tree line. Bazooka teams, rifles cleared and trusted, snap into action without hesitation. No frantic jams under fire, no desperate rod slams turning weapons into hazards. A rocket streaks true, slamming the Stoogee's sponson. A second finishes it in a gout of flame. The infantry breaks, scatters into the dusk. Clean kill, Dempsey mutters, slapping a loader on the back. No one lost to a rifle gone wrong. No position weakened by a man blinded or reeling from his own Garand. The line holds firm, presses forward at dawn, rolling up pockets of resistance that might have held longer against less reliable steel. Behind the lines, the change accelerates. Teletype chatter buzzes from Kassel to 1st Army HQ. Urgent ordnance flash cleaning rod defect confirmed. Lot 45R217. Halt distribution. Inspect. All Garand kits. Factories in Ohio and Illinois grind to pauses. Inspectors swarming assembly lines, halting quotas that fed 1 million rifles. Revised blueprints cable back. Slower quenching, stress relief anneals. Ultrasonic checks for hairlines too fine for the eye. Production snarls, but lives stack up on the other side of the ledger. He is who will fire true in the Harz Mountains. The Elbe crossings, the final lunge to the Czech border. Captain Reynolds calls Mercer into the CP that night, map table littered with overlays, marking the division's stab toward the Rhine. Division G4 sent this, he says, sliding over a mimeographed bulletin, still warm from the machine. At the top, subject, rifle maintenance alert, cracked cleaning rods. Discover, PFCD, Mercer, Easy Co., 318th Inf. Your name's on it. Battalion commanders putting you in for a Bronze Star citation. Not for killing tanks, but for keeping ours firing. Mercer stares at the paper, the black ink stark under lantern light. Pride wars with disbelief. A decoration for spotting a crack. Wars pin medals for bayonet charges and sniper kills, not for maintenance. Yet here it is, black on white. One soldier's eyes, mid-cleaning, bent the arc of supply chains that armed visions. Out beyond the wire, scouts report the Panzer Kampfgruppe Mercer first heard. Those hesitant hulks from the 11th Schremes remnants diverted eastward, never regaining momentum after Kassel's rebuff. Spooked by reinforcements, harried by artillery. They disperse into service parks or counterthrusts that fizzle against stronger American lines. A single day's caution, born of misread movements, snowballs. Shermans roll unmolested, bridges hold. The 80th punches to the muled river without the butcher's bill of a true armored clash. You changed the math, Reynolds says quietly. Not the big battles. The little edges. Rifles that work mean flanks that hold. Flanks that hold mean panzers that don't break through. We hit the Elbe cleaner because of it. Mercer thinks of the rod, now miles away in some lab, its fracture etched in photos for manuals. He thinks of the men who will never feel Garand shrapnel in their faces, who will march home instead of crates. One jam cleared, one crack spotted, and the war's vast machine adjusts, not with fanfare, but with the quiet grind of gears meshing true. By week's end, the 80th crosses the Rhine in strength, panzers reduced to rumors and wrecks. Mercer's platoon pushes on, rifles purring under oil and care, the hidden war of steel won in a beet field no one will remember. But some victories echo.